Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, blah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, savings coming at ya, savings coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see your practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
WPHAT. You're listening to the #1 health and wellness podcast, the place where health and consciousness connect. Perfectly healthy and tone radio with your host, Darren McDuffie. And now, prepare to get fat. What's cracking, peeps, and welcome back to another segment of Perfectly Healthy and Tone Radio. I'm your show host, Darren McDuffie, and today I have another great episode to share with you I did with Dr. Carri Drzyzga on her book, Reclaim Your Energy and Feel Normal Again. Before getting into the episode and really getting into my pee talk, I wanted to just ask you, what are you digging about the new format? Went to a pre-recorded format, so you should have a lot better audio quality. So I'd really love to hear your feedback. If you have time, email me at perfectlyhealthyandtoneradio@gmail.com. Again, that's perfectlyhealthyandtoneradio@gmail.com. And let me know what you're thinking. Also, if there's someone that you absolutely want to hear on the podcast, drop me an email about that as well, and I'll do my best to get them on. Now, getting into my pre-talk about the episode with Dr. Carri Drzyzga, one thing that sticks out in my mind is that from speaking with her and also other health professionals, fatigue seems to be that most common complaint when people come in to see a health professional. Fatigue is something that you should take very seriously. A lot of times I think that as we get older, we tend to accept the fact that we are supposed to have less energy, and that's just not the case. So again, take fatigue seriously. And Dr. Carri Drzyzga does a great job of actually explaining the root causes of fatigue in this particular interview. So without further ado, let's get into the episode right after I give you Dr. Carri Drzyzga's bio. Dr. Carri Drzyzga is known internationally as the functional medicine doc, the go-to expert on finding the root causes of health problems so you can feel normal again. She's a chiropractor and naturopathic doctor, host of the popular podcast, The Functional Medicine Radio Show, and author of the hit book, Reclaim Your Energy and Feel Normal Again. Dr. Carri is also the creator of Entrepreneurial Fatigue, How to Fuel Your Brain and Body for Entrepreneurial Success. Her private practice is Functional Medicine Ontario, located in Ottawa, Ontario. You can visit her at drcarri.com. Enjoy the interview. Dr. Carri Drzyzga, welcome to Perfectly Healthy and Tone Radio. How are you?
I'm great, Darren. How are you today?
Good. I'm doing awesome. Getting ready to, I can't say I'm getting ready for a hurricane, but we have a hurricane here in South Florida that's kind of looming over us. I've experienced one or two before living here in South Florida, so I'm kind of getting hankered in and tuckered down and getting ready for this thing, and hopefully it'll blow over.
I hope it does just blow over and, everybody is safe and sound. And
yeah, I don't think we're going to get the eye, which is always good. We'll probably get the outskirts, which is more of the wind, a little bit of the wind and more of the outer bands of the storm. So I'm just wanting it to blow over quickly and get back to the normal everyday life. But today we're going to be discussing your book, Reclaim Your Energy, which is, I think, something that everyone needs to do. And I wanted to really talk to you about your story, because it seems like everyone comes to health and wellness through a different route. It's very rare that we come through health and wellness because we just want to be in it. It seems like we come to it because there's a family member, as in myself, my mom passed away and kind of got me more into health and wellness, or through our own personal experience. So I wanted you to share your story of how you got into the health and wellness.
Oh, I'd love to start there, Darren. So let's see here. I was, when I was growing up, I always knew that I wanted to help people. And I knew that I always wanted to be in the medical field in some way. Mm-hmm. But I knew I did not want to be a medical doctor. And I knew I did not want to be a nurse. But I didn't know what else was out there, to tell you the truth. And somehow I stumbled onto chiropractic. And through seeing patients, I was about, to tell you the truth, I was about 5 years in a practice as a chiropractor. And my husband, by the way, he's also a chiropractor. And I remember vividly coming home one night and sitting down at dinner and looking at him and saying, do you see yourself doing this like for the next 25, 30 years? Because I'm not happy with being a chiropractor. I don't see myself doing this for the rest of my life. Like, I'm already bored 5 years in. And Darren, still having like a pile of student loans to pay off also, right? Very scary. And he was like, no, I love being a chiropractor. And I was like, okay. So I realized at that moment, I loved chiropractic, but I didn't love being a chiropractor. So one of the things that really wore on me was when patients did not get better. Why weren't they getting better? What was I missing? And so I kind of, was searching for answers, and I, started learning more about nutrition and detoxification and food allergies and sensitivities and all this stuff. And I realized what was really my calling was doing functional medicine. And I just had such a passion. I still have such a passion for functional medicine. So, okay, now fast forward, I'm 15 years in practice, and I realize I need to go back to school and get another degree so that I can really, truly practice functional medicine in its full potential. So this is now, I'm moving from Canada back to Chicago, where I'm born and raised. So I moved back for 2 years to go back to school full time, 30 hours a week, taking courses during the day, taking courses at night, studying for exams, writing papers. And on top of that, Darren, I was flying back and forth to still maintain my private practice in Canada. So it was insane. It was a crazy schedule, but that's, there are times in our lives when we know we need to do something. We need to just buckle down in order to, reach a goal that we want to achieve. So honestly, it was like 6 months into this craziness that I started getting really fatigued. And I knew it was just the stress, the sheer mental stress and physical stress I was putting my body under. And during this time, this process, my thyroid started to tank. And I just kept it together as much as I could to get through school. I just thought, well, I just got to get through this 2 years, get my degree. And so this was going back to get a naturopathic medicine degree, get my degree, pass my board exams, get my license. And then after that, I'll just take some time to recharge my batteries, just have some downtime, and things will be fine, right? So that was like so naive of me, because after graduation and after passing my boards, I spent like 3 months, Darren, where I was sleeping probably 10 hours a night and taking a 2-hour nap every day. And I just like, my energy just never came back. And I also kind of felt like my brain was burned out. Like my memory was not the same as before I went to school. And it's so funny because my husband would say, on your way home today, can you stop at the grocery store and pick up X, Y, and Z? And I say, okay. And then like literally 3 minutes later, I'm like, what did you want me to pick up? Okay, I want you to pick up X, Y, and Z. Okay, yeah, I got it. And then like 5 minutes later, I'm like, okay. I'm like, I'm really sorry. I am listening to you, but it's not staying in my memory. What did you want me to pick up? He's like, I want you to pick up X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. So I was really struggling with my brain at that point too. But so in the end, Darren, what happened was I broke all the rules. I turned the tables and I started treating myself with functional medicine. So I say broke the rules because doctors were really not supposed to treat ourselves because we cannot be, unbiased about that. But I decided enough is enough. And so I started figuring out my own case. And so that's really what started the whole impetus to write the book, was to share my story with others, because I know there are so many others struggling out there with fatigue, and all the patients that I was seeing in my private practice at Functional Medicine Ontario also who suffered with fatigue. And it was like, I came to this realization that it seems like our standard of care for treating fatigue in the typical conventional model does not work, because the standard of care is like They do some testing. The tests usually come back as normal. And then the patient is usually told something like, well, you're just a busy mom and you just need a vacation and that's why you're tired. Or you just work too hard. Maybe you're starting a burnout and you should take 3 months off of work. Or, gee, I don't know. All your tests are normal. Maybe we should start you on antidepressants. So I just started hearing all these stories from patients coming into my practice. And I was like, I really need to write a book because there are real clinical underlying causes of fatigue. And if we can just find them and fix them, patients can get their energy back.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I laugh because I'm going through this process right now. And you and I were kind of discussing off the air where I'm in the process of taking my old website and moving over to a new website and featuring the podcast and having a store. And I'm like, okay, I set up an interview maybe a month or so ago, because when I set up my podcast interviews, I'll set them up. And then what I'll do is I'll take out a calendar. I like to physically write things and then put each date on there, put the person's name, this person's going to be on. And because I've been doing this process and it's been so kind of crazy and I've been tired myself of just staying up late and researching interviews and doing different things, that I've kind of gotten tired. And my memory is not like it used to be. My memory used to be a steel trap. I'm laughing at you because I'm experiencing that right now, just because, again, I'm buckling down and wanting to achieve something else at this point in my life and really move things a little bit more forward. You mentioned fatigue, and we're talking about fatigue. Is fatigue our first warning sign that something's going to go awry?
Oh, that's a great question, Darren. I think for some people it is fatigue. That's the first warning sign. And most of the time it just gets ignored because, like, well, I'm working hard. I don't have time for exercise. Of course, I'm tired. I'm not getting enough sleep at night. But I think for other people, they'll have different warning signs, and it's not so much fatigue, but the fatigue will come usually at some point. So as you were saying, like, your mind used to be a steel trap. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of people, they have these, quote unquote senior moments where they walk into a room and they're like, why did I walk into this room? Or they pick up their cell phone and they're like, okay, who was I just thinking of calling? Or they forget where their keys are. And they just kind of shrug that off. But that's like, those are early indicators that your brain is starting to struggle. And then for other people, it might be digestive issues. Like, they're having a little bit of indigestion, gas, bloating, heartburn, and then they just kind of shrug it off. I just feel like there usually are warning signs. Fatigue might be the first one, but it could be anything. But human nature is we just kind of shrug it off, and usually we wait until it gets really bad to do something about it.
Yeah.
And I'm no different. I'm here in the expert hot seat today, but I'm no different than the average person on a lot of this.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not bragging, but my mind was so good when I was younger that anytime when you're young, you go out and I would get girls' phone numbers and I would never need to write it down. Just tell me your number. And they would like, oh, you're going to remember my number? I'm like, yeah, I remember your number. And they would just tell me their number and I would remember it. But I guess now with the advent of phones and everything else that's going on, you don't, it's like, I can't even remember my phone number sometimes. So my cell phone, more or less, someone else's, but I guess I don't depend on that memory as much as I did before.
That's true. We as a culture, we're getting so dependent on our computers and our cell phones that we're not exercising those parts of our brains.
Yeah.
And there actually is something, it's called digital dementia. Mm-hmm. And they're researching that right now to see, okay, what's going on now with this new generation that they're so into technology, but it's totally changing our brains. That could be a whole other episode, to tell you the truth, Jared.
You know what? I think I suffer from that, honestly, to tell you the truth. You mentioned in your patient description, I come from the pharmaceutical world, and we would always set up this little scenario of what we're going to talk to the doctor about, the patient description, and we would describe the ideal patient to come in for the doctor to prescribe my drug way back when. When you were talking about your patient description, you said a woman comes in and she is fatigued. She's thinking that, it's her kids or just her life. And you mentioned women specifically. Is it women that seem to suffer more for fatigue? I know that you have a practice. Or are you seeing equally that men, or are men on that end of the spectrum where they don't really like to admit that they're tired?
Oh, yeah. So you're right. In my book, I did put the focus of my book on women because mainly it is women that come to see me. I'd say it's like 75% women, 25% men. And so I think part of that is intuitively women pay better attention to their bodies. Women pay closer attention to their their intuition, their gut feeling. So like they know something is wrong. They know it's not just the kids. They know it's more than just in their head, quote, there's really something going on and they want answers. But yeah, men can definitely have fatigue as well. I think, I wonder, I'm not a man, but maybe you could answer this, Darren. I wonder, do men kind of put that under the rug and just, because they just want to always be perceived as strong and whatnot? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. And I remember like when I was doing a lot of research on different things or different topics that I'd like to maybe interview with, or different topics that I would want to maybe gear a product towards for marketing, it always seemed that women were at the top of the category for researching different types of issue, because everything I looked at was women. And I think whereas men are taught to rely on our strength and we don't like to admit that we have an issue. And it wasn't until I came into health and wellness that I was like, okay, I need to focus on this and help, because when you are, you have a husband and you have many men out there may be married, they have a family, and your family is kind of maybe depending on you for a certain type of support, monetary, emotional support, whatever it might be, and you're not there, you're sick or you're in the hospital, it takes a toll. And I don't think a lot of men realize this. But on the other end of that spectrum as well, I also think that it's something within us that we're taught to be strong. We're just taught to ignore things and just kind of bury it and say, I can make it through this. Because I've caught myself doing that recently. It's like, oh, you know what? I can make it through this. I call myself Iron Man.
Oh,
yeah. But at some point you got to say, you know what? Let me get some rest. I need to be getting more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. For me, optimally, I don't know for everyone else, but for me, I know that I need more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep. If I go to bed after 12, it's like, it's crazy. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this because you had 2 warning signs for something and I picked up on it. Cold hands and feet. There was something you talked about, cold hands and feet, that might be relatable to one condition that you test for. And then also I know that a lot of times the people who might be suffering from hypothyroidism, one of the things that they will take into account or we can take into account through nutrition or functional medicine is that this person might have a thyroid issue. And I can't remember which one had the cold hands and feet, but there were 2. And I was wondering if it's wise to test for both.
Yeah. So with cold hands and feet, there's usually 2 things that I think of straight off the bat. So one is there a thyroid condition? Mm-hmm. But then the other is poor circulation in general will also mean impaired brain function. So with patients that have cold hands, cold feet, even cold nose, like I'll ask that, is your nose cold too? And they'll be like, yeah, actually it is. If we're not getting enough blood circulating to our hands, our feet, our nose, we're also not getting enough blood in the microcirculation to our brain. So sometimes fatigue can be thyroid related. Sometimes it can be brain related. But yeah, absolutely. Straight off the bat, anybody that has fatigue, really the first 2 things that they should be checked for are their thyroid and to make sure they don't have anemia. Like, of all the causes out there, those are the 2 at the top of the list that should be checked first because they're very treatable. Yeah.
And anemia has to do with iron. It always seems like women have an issue with iron related things, why is it that women suffer more from anemia than men do?
Well, I think that is simply because of the whole process of menstruation on a monthly basis. So our body naturally is getting rid of a certain amount of blood every month. And so we're losing a certain amount of iron every month. So I think that's part of why women will have more issues with iron than men.
Mm-hmm. With the iron, is there a certain type of iron that is recommended for women who might be suffering from anemia?
Oh, that's a great question. So, what I talk about in the book and what I explain to patients is, okay, let's say you do have anemia and let's say you have iron deficiency anemia. The real question is though, why? Why do you have iron deficiency in the first place? So there's basically 4 possibilities going on. And so in functional medicine, we're always trying to get to the root cause, figure out that why. And so it's either maybe they're not getting enough iron in their diet. So maybe they're not getting enough iron into the body. So that's number 1. And number 2 is maybe they are getting enough iron in their diet, but maybe it's not getting digested and absorbed properly. So in the stomach, there can be a bacteria in the stomach called H. pylori. And H. pylori weakens stomach acid production. And from there, you won't be able to absorb iron as easily. And the other thing with absorption is I think of SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So too much bacteria in the small intestine where there normally should be virtually none. That can also lead to iron deficiency. And then the third one in that second category is actually celiac disease. The first lab warning of potential celiac disease is low iron. So either you're not getting enough iron in your diet, or it's not getting absorbed properly, or it's getting stolen from you. It's getting used up really fast. So things like typically I also put infections in that category as well, because they'll tend to feed on iron, and that's how they keep living in your body. So that could be bacterial overgrowth, yeast overgrowth, even potential parasites. And then the fourth on this list is you're bleeding from somewhere. You are losing iron. Where are you losing iron from? So that's where something like really heavy menstrual bleeding on a monthly basis, or a low-grade bleeding ulcer, or a bleeding polyp in the colon, somewhere there is blood loss. So when we think about iron deficiency, first is, I always say, is like, find out why is it there in the first place? So going back to your question, Darren, about what iron is the best. Oh my gosh, that's a great question, because honestly, I don't really care. Because the difficulty with iron is that iron is difficult to absorb. It causes a lot of digestive upsets for patients typically. Some will get nausea. A lot of people will get constipated on iron. And it depends on how sensitive their digestive tract is or isn't. Some people have an iron stomach and some people don't. I'll just tell them to look for something in a capsule form rather than a tablet, because capsules will always break down in your stomach a lot easier and quicker than a tablet would. So capsules or even a liquid iron supplement, and to just kind of try it out and see how do you feel on it. And I'll usually have them aim for a dose of like 90 milligrams of iron on a daily basis, but whatever form of iron works best for them and kind of, doesn't cause digestive upset. And then honestly, what I'll do, Darren, is about 3-4 months down the line is I'll retest their blood to make sure, okay, the iron seems to be digesting okay in your body, but is it really bringing your iron stores up? So usually 3-4 months down the line is about how long it takes to actually see that change in the actual blood work. And then we'll really know if it's working.
I don't like getting this battle of sexes, but when you're in this for a while, you tend to notice that certain conditions affect certain sexes. Like for women, you mentioned SIBO, and SIBO has been such a hot topic for, so many years. And you seem to see that more in women. Do you know why that might be?
Let me see. I think some of that could be because of the use of antibiotics. So I typically find a lot of women will have SIBO, especially if they've used antibiotics in their like teens and 20s for acne. And then a lot of women too who have been on birth control pills, like that will kind of predispose their body hormonally to SIBO as well. So off the top of my head, those are the two reasons that I usually think of as far as why is there such a difference.
We seem to stray away from the thyroid, but I wanted to get back on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So with the thyroid, in your book, you talked about normal levels and ideal levels. And you said that you like to work with ideal levels. Explain that philosophy.
Oh, okay. So on a typical blood test that we get back from the lab, there is the reference range of what's considered normal. So the reference range, especially for the thyroid, the TSH test, which is the one that's usually done to screen for thyroid, usually is on the low end of the range at a 0.5 and at the high end of the range as a 5.0. And depending on the lab, those actual values can differ slightly. So each lab actually has their own kind of, quote, normal range, and you'd think they'd be standardized, but it's not. So that normal range actually is quite broad, though. And so we want to see, like, okay, what is really within that normal range? What is really ideal numbers for ideal thyroid function? And years ago, this came out from the American Academy of Clinical Endocrinologists, and they said, you know, at the top end of the range, at a 3.0, if your numbers are above a 3.0 on your TSH, that's actually when we should start considering that as being hypothyroid or low thyroid. And even at a 2.0 or higher, that's when we should start investigating and saying, oh, there is probably a thyroid weakness starting, but it's not gotten bad to the point where we would actually call it hypothyroidism. So within that normal range, there is always an ideal range for health.
From my own research, because when I encounter something and I don't know about it, I tend to go to research. And I know that there are thyroid receptors on, most major organs in our bodies. When your thyroid levels aren't in ideal range, does this affect our nutrient levels like B12, vitamin D, etc.?
Yeah, actually, so every cell of your body has thyroid receptors on it. And so when the thyroid is out of balance, it will affect every part of the body. And so from a very fundamental kind of stripped down standpoint, the thyroid, when it gets weak, kind of everything starts to slow down in your body. So your digestion will slow down. Your ability to process food and absorb nutrients will slow down. And then your brain health will slow down. Your sex hormone production will slow down. Everything will get affected. It's a real trickle-down effect.
And I have to ask you this because there's so many schools of thought out there about this. It's Hashimoto's and iodine. I've heard don't use Hashimoto, don't use iodine when you have Hashimoto's, use iodine when you have Hashimoto's, but supplement with selenium. What is your school of thought on that?
Oh, you're right. That is a big controversy. Yeah. It is huge. So I'm a real fan of Dr. Datis Karazian, yes. And I know that he is a hardcore researcher. And so what he says, I will always agree with. So Dr. Karazian has always said that you have to be extremely careful using iodine with Hashimoto's. I know there is the research out there on the selenium, but he's never addressed that. So I'm assuming that might not be as strong of research as some people think. Anyways, I with my patients say avoid iodine as much as you can. And in the meantime, we're working on all these things to bring their antibody levels for their Hashimoto's down to the normal range to get them into remission. And there are times when we've done pretty much everything, and I'll say okay, maybe now it's time to really look at your diet and see where are you getting even the most minute forms of iodine, and eliminate those from your diet. And then like finally they respond. So I'm of the camp of avoid iodine, because iodine, we know, will stimulate TPO antibody production, which is not what we want with Hashimoto's. Now, we do know that selenium helps to block TPO production. So we always want selenium added in with Hashimoto's.
Going back to our immune system, and this is something that I noticed in my own personal experience when I found out what my food sensitivities were. And I wanted to kind of take this as a two-part question. When I suddenly pulled out the things that I was sensitive to, my immune system heightened, but I also know with that heightening, I had more energy. I almost felt like I was superhuman. I wanted you to talk a little bit about your experience with food sensitivities with, patients or even with yourself, and also chronic infections, because you talked a little bit about that earlier, how chronic infections kind of suppress our immune system because our immune system is always fighting, and how that might lend itself to fatigue.
Okay, so first off, I will say that usually patients who come in and have fatigue, usually they have a lot of things going on. So it's usually not just like one thing, like, oh, it's just your thyroid and we'll fix that, and then life is going to be, all rainbows and glitter again. And it's usually like a lot of things going on. So when it comes to reactions to foods, there's actually many different forms of reactions to foods. There's actually, there's true allergies, there's true sensitivities, so there are true immune responses, and then there are things like digestive influences and abnormal shunting of blood from the brain to the digestive tract. So when it comes to, we'll call them food reactions, so we're kind of covering all those bases. Food reactions can be a big contributor to fatigue and actually many different health problems. And I forget who it was that said that food reactions were like the great mimicker because they can cause any symptom of your body. So if we took like 10 people and we lined them up right now, Darren, and let's say they all had a sensitivity to eggs, one might have anxiety, one might have depression that gets triggered with the eggs. One might have skin rashes. One might have joint pain. One might have constipation. One might have diarrhea. One might have migraines. One might have fatigue. So you get the point there that food reactions can really contribute to just about any symptom of the body. So it makes it difficult to figure out. In my own personal case, I did get to a point where I realized I really had to buckle down with my diet and do a gluten-free diet. That's where I started with. And that was after taking a course by Dr. Tom O'Brien, who is one of the leading gluten experts. And it took me about 3 years to work up the courage to do a gluten-free diet, to be quite honest, Darren, because I was like, oh my God, it's going to be the hardest thing I'm ever going to do. And what am I going to eat? And it was like, it was a lot of negativity in my mind. And so what I did is, and I recommend this to anybody who is making diet changes, is just start with one meal at a time. So like I started with breakfast, and I was like, okay, how do I make my current breakfast into a gluten-free breakfast? So I did some research on the internet, just do a search of gluten-free breakfast recipes. Okay, what kind of foods do I need to shop for? What do I need in my pantry? What do I need in my refrigerator? So within a couple of weeks, I had my breakfast mastered. Okay, once I mastered my breakfast, then I moved on to lunch. Okay, now how do I switch over my lunch to being gluten-free? So the listeners out there, they can do the same process with any kind of diet change. And I realized once I switched my entire diet over to being gluten-free, like my energy came up 2 notches. On my way to getting my entire energy back. It came up a couple more notches. So with patients out there, food can be a big influence. So there's food reactions. And then the other thing food-wise is, depending on how you're eating, if you're not maintaining a good, smooth blood sugar level, that will also deplete you of energy as well. Okay, so I'm thinking, we only have so much time here. I could talk about blood sugar, but I know the other part of your question was about infections.
Yeah, and how they suppress the immune system, because if your immune system is constantly fighting something off, and I mean, anybody can attest to this. If you have a cold or flu or something, I remember having the flu when I played basketball in college, and man, it was like someone hit me with a 2x4, and I remember how fatigued and how tired I was. But you know, when you're constantly fighting that infection, you don't know you have that infection. Your immune system is just putting out that energy. Obviously, that's going to make you fatigued as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. So again, infections. So that could be something like SIBO, or too much yeast growing in the gut, or parasites, or just not enough probiotics too. In that your immune system is always at war with invaders like parasites and yeast and bacteria. That it's like soldiers on the battlefield, and that we can sometimes see these markers in the blood work, that white blood cells are low, or different specific white blood cells and neutrophils, or the eosinophils or the lymphocytes are either too low or too high. So we can see in the blood work sometimes signs of chronic infection, and that does slowly weaken the immune system and sap you of energy. And the other part is that these infections, you know, when you eat food to fuel your body, but these infections, like, they're going to live off of you. They're going to steal those nutrients, you know, from you, from your food. And that's another way that people will get low energy too, is that they're not being nourished like they think they should be being nourished, because the infections are stealing nutrients from them so that they can survive.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit about blood sugar imbalance. I kind of wanted to get into it a little bit more. And also, in the book, you talked about detoxification being necessary when you have a blood sugar imbalance. Talk a little bit more about that.
So I find in my patients, I always try and see about blood sugar imbalance, because that's a very, very fundamental part of getting energy back, is just from a purely diet perspective, is, are you fueling your body properly to maintain good, even blood sugar? You could do everything else on the list, work on thyroid, take your B12, work on infections, but fundamentally, if your blood sugar is imbalanced, is not in balance, your energy will only get so far. You will still have fatigue. So I'll always try and see if the patient has low blood sugar. So, you know, the typical symptoms of that are skipping meals, you know, waking up, skipping breakfast, getting shaky and irritable through the day, and then feeling better after you eat. And then the other thing is waking up during the middle of the night, like 2, 3 in the morning, just waking up. That usually is a sign of low blood sugar. And then the other I look for is when the blood sugar is the opposite and is too high. So typical symptoms of that I look for are, you know, patients that eat a meal and they feel tired after they eat. You know, they feel like they just want to take a nap after eat. That's usually because their blood sugar is too high and they've eaten too many carbs. Or, you know, you eat a meal and you have a craving for sugar. You feel like, oh, I think I need a dessert, or, you know, I'm going to be healthy, so I won't have a dessert. I'll just have like a piece of fruit or some dried fruit or something, or just like one square of dark chocolate. Again, craving sweets after your meal is usually a sign that your blood sugar is too high. And then the last thing I look for with high blood sugar is people who have a hard time falling asleep at night. Often it's because their blood sugar is running too high. And so there's kind of those two categories, and then there's a third category, which is the blend of both. You know, through the day, a person can have blood sugar that's running high, running low. They're kind of on a roller coaster, and all of that can be very easily managed through simple diet changes and fueling your body and your brain. So the other thing, Darren, is your brain is one of the biggest consumers of glucose in your body. So if your blood sugar is out of balance, it has a big effect on your brain. And one of the things I always ask patients is, okay, you feel fatigued. Do you feel tired in your brain, or do you feel tired in your body? So do you feel tired physically or mentally, or both? Because that'll kind of clue me into like what part of the body I need to be looking at. So yeah, the brain is a big consumer of sugar, and actually, you know, taking it to the extreme here, we talked about digital dementia at the very beginning of our interview. You know, we kind of brushed on that real fast, and how one of the earliest warning signs can be, you know, having these quote senior moments in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s that your brain is starting to get weak. So they are now calling Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes because blood sugar has such a big impact. So for the listeners out there right now, that's one of the very first places I'll start with patients is just making sure their blood sugar is in good balance before I move on to any other part of their case. That's how important it is.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the brain, because I just had an aha moment, because I used to tell people this all the time. You can give me anything physically, and because I play basketball, I've kind of gone through everything physically that a person can go through. And if you've been an athlete, you know that, you know, they run you to death. They do all, and you're pretty much geared physically for anything. But when I'm mentally tired, it's just like that kills me. Because you said, is your brain tired? Like my brain will get tired sometimes, and it's like, okay, now I know it's time for me to rest. What's going on with people's brains now? Because you're finding that more. I don't know if you've, Kelly Brogdon has the book on depression and all this, these other things that are coming out, but it seems like we're more depressed. We have more anxiety. People just are more on edge in general in our society. And you're in Canada. I'm pretty sure it's the same thing here.
It is.
In the
it's
States.
The same.
What the heck is going on with our brains, and how is this contributing to the fatigue that we're experiencing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't know if we'll have enough time to answer that.
Well, I'm going to keep you a little longer, so let's go, because I have some stuff that I really wanted to cover and get into. So if you have a little more time, I have a little more time.
Oh, I do have a little more time. Okay,
Great.
So the brain. So in healthcare up to this point, healthcare has basically been a neck down kind of a treatment. And in general, we've kind of forgotten about how the brain plays a role in the whole health of the body, not just the health of the brain itself, but the whole health of the body too. The body, you know, we're learning that there's a brain-gut connection and a gut-brain connection. We talked a little bit earlier about the thyroid and Hashimotos. There's a huge connection with Hashimotos and then contributing to poor brain health. So I don't know if just some of this is coming up because it's a real hot topic in the research is brain function, brain gut function, the role of probiotics and brain health. And then two, I don't know, Darren, if it's just as a culture, you know, and I can say this because I'm an American, I'm living in Canada. I see both, you know, cultures that, you know I was kind of raised on the notion of, you know, you got to work hard to succeed, and it's not about living a fulfilled life. It's about having a lot of stuff, and not so much living a fulfilled life, whatever that means for you. And so I think too, part of that is our upbringing that needs to change. You know, what is really important in life. So I think that's part of too why people are having so many problems with struggling with brain health. And then the last thing too is that, what was I going to say here? Oh, I just had a senior moment myself. Well, that's not good. I got to work on that.
That's okay. I do the same
it'll come
thing.
back to me, Darren.
Yeah. When I'm on the air, I kind of do the same thing. Like a question will come in my mind and I'll forget it. And then I'm sitting here scrambling in my mind. Where's my question? Where's my question? And ultimately it'll come back to me. I just think that's just a hazard of being on the air and, you know, everybody's listening. Exercise. Well, not exercise. I want to get into nutrient deficiencies because as a society, we're obviously suffering from nutrient deficiencies. Even people who, because when I was on the outside looking in, I always thought that people who were overweight had too many nutrients. But I'm finding out now that I'm on the inside with nutrition and interviewing people on functional wellness and all this other stuff, is that these people are not having enough nutrients. And those people who are usually overweight are also suffering from fatigue. So why are we not getting enough nutrients, and why are nutrition deficiencies contributing to our fatigue?
Oh, yeah, you're totally right about that. A lot of people are undernourished, malnourished. And so I think part of that is the whole industrialization of our food industry. You know, we eat stuff that comes from California and South America and elsewhere, and it's picked too early to actually have enough nutrition in it for what we need. Rather than ideally eating things locally grown that are picked at their peak of ripeness, that are full of goodness and vitamins and minerals and are grown in a nutrient-rich soil. So, part of that really goes back to the fundamentals of the food industry is not there for our health. The food industry is there to make money off of us, And then I think the other thing is, too, there can be so many imbalances along the way with stress hormones, sex hormones, thyroid hormones, these chronic hidden infections, these chronic hidden food sensitivities. They can all, in their own way, shape, and form, contribute to leaky gut and gut inflammation. And when we have that happening, it gets more difficult for us to digest and absorb our foods and our supplements too. It gets harder to just the process of digestion and absorption. So I think, that goes on for months and months and years, and that's why so many people are struggling with their health, even if they are thinking that they're doing all the right things, eating as healthy as they can. Sometimes fundamentally, if you're not producing enough stomach acid and digestive enzymes, you can eat the greatest diet, but if you're not digesting it and absorbing it properly, it all has a domino effect.
And speaking of that, I just had Dr. Jonathan Wright on my show last Friday, and we talked about his book, Why Stomach Acid is Good for You. And we didn't even touch on this, and I wanted to touch on this because I was reminded of it in your book. And it's about the PPIs, the proton pump inhibitors, and how they actually rob nutrients. I wanted you to kind of embellish that a little bit more, because a lot of people, again, I come from pharma, and I knew a lot about certain medications that contain fluoride, certain medications that rob the body of nutrients. But again, I wanted you to expand on these proton pump inhibitors and how they actually rob the body of nutrients.
Oh, sure, Darren. So for the listeners out there, proton pump inhibitors, or PPIs for short, they're one class of antacid medications that are typically prescribed for patients that have heartburn, gastritis, reflux, or GERD. And so these PPI groups of medications, they basically block stomach acid production. And the problem with that is that the fundamental biochemistry of how we digest and absorb nutrients requires strong acid. So it gets to be a pH thing. So for the listeners out there, if you've had a swimming pool or a fish tank, you have to measure the pH of that liquid, and it has to be at a certain range in order to be good. It's the same thing for your stomach. The pH of your stomach needs to be between a 1.0 and a 3.0, I believe. So highly, highly acidic. And it's only in those highly, highly acidic conditions that we're able to absorb things like iron, things like calcium, things like magnesium and B12 and whatnot. And so as the pH of the stomach changes, and as the pH gets higher, actually the stomach acid gets weaker. It's a simple biochemistry thing. Then iron does not get absorbed. Calcium does not get absorbed. Magnesium does not get absorbed. B12 does not get absorbed. And so the trickle-down effect is, at some point you will usually start seeing insufficiencies of these nutrients, and then for some people, true deficiencies. And this is not just me saying that. There's actually hard research evidence on all of this. And I know in Canada right now, I don't know if it's in the same in the States, but in Canada, the PPIs all have a black box warning, which means when it's prescribed by the medical doctor, that it can only be prescribed for short periods of time, because they know now that long-term effects of PPIs are really, really bad.
Yeah, it's got to be Canada, because I know it takes a lot for them to place a black box warning on anything in America, because I've experienced that myself when I was in pharma. And even when they did place the black box warning on it, the company denied it. So it's got to be a lot to put a black box warning on a drug here in the States. Now, I'm not sure about Canada. The last thing I wanted to talk about before we kind of got to some solutions was cortisol imbalance and adrenals, and how that may contribute to fatigue as well. And for the audience out there, I'm pointing out that the book goes into functional medicine and how we're able to take these things step by step process and get to the root cause of everything. And that's kind of why the conversation is going this way. But again, talk about cortisol, where our cortisol should be ideally, and maybe mix the adrenals in there and what they do when it comes to cortisol.
Okay, so cortisol is one of our hormones. Cortisol impacts, I think, 11 different body systems. And one of the big things that cortisol is made to do is to help protect us from the harmful effects of stress. And this is the long-term chronic stress that we all, suffer from in some way, shape, or form. And so, oftentimes I'll have patients come in and I'll put on my detective hat and I'm thinking like, okay, where's this coming from? And I'll ask them, when did this fatigue start, or when do you remember having good energy? Trying to figure out on like the timeline of their life, when did things, go off the rails? And then I'll usually ask them, okay, what happened like 6 to 12 months before that? And oftentimes, Darren, it's something pretty stressful in their lives. So it could be something like the death or illness of a loved one. It could be separation or divorce, major financial struggles or loss of a job, something like that. So stress really does have a big impact on our health. And cortisol, I would say, is one of the more direct means that we can see that. There's a researcher from Stanford who has done the bulk of the research on cortisol. That's Dr. Robert Sapolsky. And so when cortisol gets out of balance, it's going to affect our brain, it's going to affect our sex hormones, it's going to affect our thyroid hormones. What you might feel, though, is sometimes people will feel tired but wired. Sometimes people will just feel tired and exhausted. Sometimes people will start having weight gain, especially weight gain around their belly, that belly fat. That's very typical of cortisol imbalance. And normally cortisol is part of our sleep-wake cycle as well. So normally cortisol should be highest in the morning, and that's part of the process chemically of what triggers us to wake up. At some point during the night, our glucose, our blood sugar gets too low, and then our cortisol has to kick in to start raising the blood sugar, and so should be highest in the morning when we wake up, giving us lots of energy to tackle our day. And then through the day, cortisol slowly decreases. And then during the night is when it really should be at its lowest. And that's when we should be getting really great, deep sleep. And then through the night, it slowly creeps up to peak in the morning again. So that's part of the rhythm, the cycle, the circadian rhythm or the sleep-wake cycle that cortisol is also involved with. And cortisol is best measured with a saliva test. So there's a rhythm to it, and you can't see that rhythm in just one blood test. And you could go and get like 4 blood tests done in one day, but it's not easy to do. And so saliva testing is a more accurate way to see what that cortisol rhythm is doing. Because Darren, some people, their cortisol rhythm they're like a flat line all day long. And some people, their rhythm is like the opposite of what it's supposed to be. It's too low in the morning and it's too high at night. And then like they can't sleep. And just relying on symptoms is not a great way to say like what is going on with the rhythm. Actually doing the test tells us a lot more than just what the symptoms could be telling us.
So with the last couple of minutes, I always like to get into some solutions or to start discussing how we can, I don't want to say push through fatigue, but have more energy. I live here in South Florida, and I've noticed that I have to drink a lot more water than maybe someone else who's living somewhere else. And when I'm not drinking enough water, I've realized that it can contribute to my fatigue factor. How important is water when it comes to overcoming fatigue?
Well, I think for some people, water is a big part of why they are tired, to tell you the truth. It's not for everybody, but for some cases, it's a big part of it, especially, Darren, in my practice, I see my patients that are teachers are often very dehydrated because they just don't have time to be drinking water all day and then to be running to the bathroom. So they just don't drink during the day and they get dehydrated, and it has a big effect on their brain and they feel tired. So yeah, that's definitely part of it. A lot of this, when we just talk about like the solutions, a lot of it is going back to the basics. There are the basic foundational things that need to be in place to have good health. Making sure you're drinking adequate amounts of water is part of that, as is also stress management, getting adequate exercise, eating healthy. And the other one is I like to call vitamin R, which is rest, relaxation, and recreation. Those are the basics.
Yeah. So I got a question to ask you about the R, and that is what do you do? I guess, where does exercise fit in there? Because, excuse me, if someone is obviously fatigued, are you going to recommend that they go out and do CrossFit, or is there something that they can do?
Oh yeah. Oh, this is always the struggle. And you're so right about this. Is the struggle with fatigue is we know, so if we break it down to the cellular level, okay, so your body is made of organs, and organs are made from collections of tissues, and tissues are made from collections of cells, and inside each and every cell of your body are more tiny little organs. They're called organelles. And every cell of your body has at least one mitochondria in it, and the job of the mitochondria is to make energy. So you know how you put gas in your car, and somehow in the engine all the magic happens, and that gas gets combusted and turned into power. So in your body, the job of the mitochondria is like the engine. The job of the mitochondria is to take the food that you eat, the glucose, and to convert it into pure energy to drive everything in your body, to give you energy, to make sure you have enough energy to keep your brain working, to keep your heart beating, to repair and rebuild and whatnot. So one of the great things about exercise is that exercise helps you build new healthy mitochondria. So exercise helps you with energy production. The catch-22 is that so many people are so exhausted and tired that, part of it is like they mentally can't wrap their head around doing some exercise because they feel like they don't have enough energy to even do exercise, and the exercise is probably going to make them worse. But the simple truth is you need to do a certain amount of exercise to start rebuilding your mitochondria stores so that you can start making energy. The thing is to make sure you're doing the right exercises for you. And you're right, Darren, it's not going out and doing CrossFit like straight off the bat.
Yeah.
Or like a lot of people, that's going to kill them. That's going to make them worse. So it's whatever it is that's going to work for you. So for a lot of people, it could just be going for a 10-minute walk or doing some light yoga, not power yoga, not, hot yoga or Bikram yoga. It's just doing some light, relaxing yoga or some light weights for maybe 20 minutes. Usually that's kind of where I'll have patients start, and I'll say to exercise within your body's tolerance. So what I mean by that is if you feel after you've exercised, if you feel unusually tired or unusually sore for the amount of exercise that you just did, that means you overdid it for what your body can tolerate. So for some people, a 15-minute walk will put them in bed the rest of the day. It's just too much for them. But a 10-minute walk is, they can handle. So, okay, stay within 10 minutes for now until we, and we'll just start building on that. So I always like to say, you, the individual, needs to figure out what you can tolerate, and then you'll slowly build on that.
Yeah. I always tell people exercise is about progression, because when I first came into this, it was more fitness related. And I noticed with myself is that I never tried to go out and run a mile the first day. It was like, okay, I will walk on a treadmill, and then the walk became a little jog, and then it became something else. And before I knew it, I was running 45 minutes on the treadmill without a problem. But it's all about progression. You yourself do not like yoga.
I don't.
You like boxing, and you're a woman after my own heart, because I'm a real big boxing fan. But talk about why you love boxing so much.
Yeah. So one of the questions you had was about vitamin R.
Yes.
And exercise. Actually, if we can combine our vitamin R, which is our rest, relaxation, and recreation, if we can combine that with our exercise, that's like a 1-2 punch right there. So yeah, you're right. I don't like yoga simply because, Darren, I've never been flexible. Never. I was not able to be a cheerleader in my high school days because I was never able to do a cartwheel or the splits. And so I find yoga just frustrating because of that. And so what I've learned instead is that, what really works for me is boxing. That I can go to the gym and I take a boxing class, and it's about hitting the heavy bag. It's not about sparring with other people. It's about hitting the heavy bag. And that, what ends up happening is I've realized that part of this is just, I find it fun. It's a great stress reliever. Hitting the heavy bag is great for stress relief, for thinking about all those things that are bothering you and just getting it out on the heavy bag. Okay. And then the other thing I found, Darren, is that me personally, I have a hard time shutting my brain off. And I think a lot of people are like that. And I realized that doing boxing, I have to shut off my brain. I have to focus on that bag for whatever the 3-minute round that I'm doing. I have to focus on what I'm doing, so I'm hitting the bag properly. I have good form, so I don't hurt myself. And because I have to maintain that focus, I'm literally shutting my brain off. So I'm not thinking about patients. I'm not thinking about my to-do list. I'm not thinking about anything else. So it gives my brain a rest at the same time. And I just find it so much, I find it fun that by the time I get to the end of like my 45-minute session, I'm like, geez, that's it? Like, can we go longer? So I'm actually having fun doing that too. So for me, it is vitamin R and exercise all wrapped into one.
Yeah, and boxing is really great. It's all over conditioning. You condition your arms. It's just about everything. Probably one of the most physically demanding sports with all the running and, the things that you have to do. And I love watching boxing. I've never boxed a day in my life, but I come from playing basketball, but I marvel at these guys because they put their bodies through so many excruciating things to be able to come out there and box round after round. But it's also fun. I've hit the heavy bag and kicked the heavy bag and done all this other stuff. And like you said, it turns my mind off because I'm like you. I'm really analytical. I'm a thinker. And when you're doing something like that, it helps you to kind of turn your mind off and just get into the moment. So it's great that you like boxing. Dr. Carri Drzyzga, it has been a pleasure. I'd love to have you back on and we speak of another topic someday and some other time, but it's been a pleasure.
Darren McDuffie, it has been a pleasure on my end too. This has been a great interview. I love the questions that you asked, and I hope that I was able to give your audience some good information, because the reality is a lot of people have fatigue. They're struggling out there, and there are answers for them. So thank you so much for having me on so I could share some of that information.
Yeah. And real quick, how do they get your book, and what is your website for the listeners out there?
Oh, okay. So my book is available on Amazon. So again, it's called Reclaim Your Energy and Feel Normal Again, Fixing the Root Cause of Your Fatigue with Natural Treatments. And if you'd like to know more about me and listen to my podcast or read my blog, my website, kind of my home base, is at drcarri.com. So that is spelled drcarri.com, and that's where you can get all of my resources.
All right, thank you.
Medicine is one of the most difficult, fast-paced, yet rewarding paths you can take. You can set out on your own and navigate the student loans, the bureaucracies, and systems that define a typical medical career. Or you can apply for the U.S. Army's Health Professions Scholarship Program and launch yourself into a medical career like no other. Your tuition will be completely covered, and when you graduate med school, you'll learn from and work with some of the most elite minds in medicine. That's the Army difference. Learn more and apply today at goarmy.com/HPSP.